The sea had seemed endless. For hours it stretched like liquid glass beneath a blazing sky, carrying them further and further from the world they knew. The small boat cut across the water with a steady rhythm, and for a time there was comfort in the isolation. No traffic, no voices, no screens. Only the gentle churn of the wake. When the island rose into view, it was almost too perfect. A crescent of white sand embraced the turquoise waves, dense palms swayed in the breeze, and at its heart stood a solitary house, pale walls gleaming against the green jungle. To the exhausted couple, it looked like a promise made flesh. The travel agent's words had played in their minds from the moment they left the mainland. Exclusive retreat, untouched, private, yours alone. And indeed, when their feet touched the pier, it seemed he had spoken the truth. The air smelled of salt and flowers, the jungle whispered with unseen birds, and the house waited with doors open, stocked with food, wine, and all the comforts of modernity. The first day was a dream painted too vividly. They swam in waters so clear they seemed unreal, ate fruit heavy with sweetness, and lay on the deck watching the sun dissolve into the horizon. The silence of the island was intoxicating, a silence that made them believe, if only briefly, that the world beyond had ceased to exist. When night came, it carried no threat. The generator hummed faintly, the ocean whispered against the shore, and the insects sang a chorus that lulled them to sleep. It should have been peace. It should have been safety. But peace never lasts. Time fractured in the dark. She woke first, not to the sea, but to something that did not belong. At first it was a vibration beneath the sound of the waves, subtle enough to dismiss as imagination. But then it shaped itself into rhythm, into words, into voices that were too deliberate to be mistaken for nature. Chanting. Her body stiffened in the sheets. For a long moment she lay motionless, afraid even to breathe, listening as the sound rose and fell in strange cadences. When she touched his arm, he stirred, and soon his expression mirrored her own. They listened together, hearts synchronized with the alien rhythm echoing from the jungle. There were no words between them, not at first. Only the unspoken acknowledgement that something lived beyond the veil of trees. Something that should not have been there. Eventually he whispered, his voice a crack in the silence. Not possible. Because the island was supposed to be theirs alone. They stood at the window, curtains drawn slightly aside. The jungle beyond was a wall of shifting blackness. Nothing moved, yet the sound crawled closer. The chant carried on the wind, a vibration that pressed against the glass, seeping into the villa. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps it only felt that way. The night thickened around them until it seemed the darkness itself had weight. Finally, with the inevitability of fear pushing against reason, they left the safety of the house. The flashlight's narrow beam carved a fragile path through the undergrowth. Every leaf seemed to shiver at their presence, every root threatened to catch their steps. The jungle smelled of earth and rot, damp and overwhelming. Yet the sound pulled them deeper, like a current dragging them into depths unseen. The trees opened into a clearing. Firelight flickered against the trunks, painting the world in amber and shadow. Figures stood in a circle, their forms swallowed in black robes, faces hidden beneath hoods. Torches rose and fell in ritual rhythm, their flames steady against the night wind. At the center lay something bound, a shape unmistakably human. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, until one of the figures raised a blade. The fire caught its edge, and in that instant the bound shape screamed, a sound ripped from the deepest part of terror. The knife descended. They recoiled as if the steel had cut through their own skin. His hand clamped over her mouth, silencing the cry that rose instinctively from her throat. Branches tore at them as they stumbled back into the jungle, the sound of the ritual pursuing them with every breath. The villa greeted them with its sterile perfection, but now it felt like a coffin. He locked the door with shaking hands and went straight to the phone, the lifeline promised by the travel agent. The number rang once, twice, then fell into silence. Silence. A third time. Nothing. Her voice broke the air like glass. He knew. The words carried the weight of revelation. The island was not a gift. It was a trap. The hours that followed twisted into something unrecognizable. Every sound outside became suspect. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. The insects fell silent at intervals, leaving a silence too absolute to be natural, a silence filled by the phantom echo of chanting. Time no longer obeyed them. Minutes elongated into hours, hours into a timeless dread. They sat together, listening, waiting. The air inside the villa grew heavy, thick with the weight of their fear. And then, faint at first but undeniable, the chanting returned. Closer. Around them. The chanting lingered long after it should have ended, woven into the silence like a stain that could not be washed away. Every corner of the villa seemed to hum with its echo, every wall absorbing it and breathing it back in distorted fragments. The couple sat unmoving, unwilling to speak, afraid that words would break whatever fragile barrier still kept the night at bay. At last he rose, pacing the length of the room, hands trembling against his own restraint. The phone lay on the table, silent, mocking. He lifted it again, pressed the buttons harder this time as if force could summon a response. The dead tone of the line vibrated in his ear, empty and final. Her eyes followed him, wide and hollow. She whispered, almost inaudible, the first word since the silence had begun. "We're not alone." It was not a revelation. It was a confirmation of what they both already knew. The night thickened. Rain began to fall, first as a whisper against the roof, then as a steady roar. The storm clawed at the villa, windows rattling, trees bending like skeletal figures in the gale. But the chanting did not fade. Instead, it wove itself into the storm, rising and falling with the thunder, carried on the wind as though the island itself were speaking. They tried the generator. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, leaving only the storm's illumination. Lightning cast violent shapes across the walls, carving shadows that twisted and reached like living things. The villa became a hollow shell, each corner darker than it should have been, each doorway an invitation to something unseen. Sleep was impossible. They moved from room to room, searching for safety where none existed. The windows revealed only sheets of rain and trees writhing in the wind. Yet sometimes, just at the edge of lightning's flash, they thought they saw figures, still, patient, standing among the palms. "Watching," he whispered once, voice sharp, almost breaking. "They're waiting." And then no more words. The storm dragged the hours into something formless. When dawn came, it brought no comfort. The sun rose pale and distant, its light filtered through clouds that seemed too heavy, too low. The jungle steamed in the aftermath of the rain, and the air was thick, suffocating. They left the villa cautiously, every step hesitant, driven by a need to confirm whether what they had seen and heard was real. The beach stretched empty, white sand undisturbed. The boat that had brought them here was gone, leaving only wet grooves in the sand where it had once rested. Panic pressed against their chests, but the silence of the island forced them inward. They walked along the edge of the jungle, eyes darting toward the trees. No figures stood among the palms now. No chanting reached their ears. Only the hiss of waves and the buzz of insects. Yet both felt the weight of unseen eyes following every movement. The second night was worse. It began with a sound like breath against the glass. She heard it first, faint, close, almost gentle. When she pressed her ear to the window, there was nothing. Yet when she turned away, the glass fogged as though someone had exhaled upon it. He checked every lock, every shutter, but it brought no comfort. The villa felt smaller, its walls closing in. The storm had returned with new fury, hammering the roof and tearing at the trees. And then the chanting returned. Not distant this time. Not from the jungle. From the walls. The villa seemed to breathe with it, vibrating softly, rhythmically, as if the very structure had become a vessel for voices that did not belong. Words too ancient to understand filled the rooms, pressing against their ears until thought itself fractured beneath the weight of sound. She clutched at her head, eyes wide, mouth open in silent panic. He pressed his palms against the walls, desperate, as if he could push the voices back into silence. But the chanting grew louder, filling every hollow space until the storm itself seemed quiet in comparison. Then, just as suddenly, silence. a silence so profound it seemed the world had ceased. They did not sleep. They could not. Hours blurred into a haze of watching shadows, listening for sounds that may or may not have existed. Their own breathing seemed too loud, their own hearts traitors against the silence. By dawn, their exhaustion had sharpened into something brittle. They argued for the first time, not with shouting, but with fragments of words, sharp as knives. He wanted to search the island, to find the source, to confront it. She wanted only to hide, to wait, to survive. Her voice broke once, trembling as though the words themselves cost too much to form. "We won't survive." The phrase hung in the air like a prophecy. The island offered no escape. Every path into the jungle twisted back toward the villa. Trails dissolved into undergrowth. Landmarks shifted. What should have been minutes of walking stretched into hours, yet always the house waited at the edge of vision, pale and patient. It became clear, the island itself was not simply a place. It was a snare. The third night stripped away what little strength remained. They sat together in the main room, backs pressed against the wall, clutching the last of the wine like a shield against despair. The storm had not ceased for 3 days, though by now they no longer marked time. Rain blurred the windows, thunder rolled endlessly, and the villa felt half submerged in another reality. When the chanting returned, it was different. Slower. Deeper. It moved not through the walls, but through the floor, rising from the ground itself. The vibrations crawled into their bones, rattling teeth, sinking into marrow. And then, beneath the door, a thin line of light appeared. Not lightning, not fire, something golden, unnatural, steady. It stretched across the threshold like a wound in the dark. He whispered, voice breaking under the weight of it. "They're here." The words were not needed. She already knew. The golden light at the door pulsed with a rhythm that was not of this world. It seeped inward in thin veins, spreading across the floor like liquid fire. The villa's walls seemed to hold their breath. The storm momentarily hushed as if the entire island was waiting for what would come next. They did not move at first. Fear had frozen them into statues, their bodies trembling but rooted in place. The light flickered once, then widened, bleeding through the cracks of the doorway until the outline of the frame burned bright against the blackness. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate knocks. 3. The rhythm was steady, almost ceremonial. Each strike echoed too loudly, reverberating through the walls, shaking dust from the ceiling beams. The air in the room thickened, pressing against lungs, suffocating thought. She clutched his arm, nails digging into his skin, eyes wide with a terror that words could not express. He pulled her back toward the far corner of the room, as though distance could create safety. The knock ceased. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. For a moment, they believed it might be over. But the door handle turned. The lock held. Metal scraped against metal as something twisted and pulled from the other side, insistent, patient. The golden light flared brighter, leaking through every seam, until the wood began to warp under its glow. He pressed his weight against the door, shoulder braced, heart hammering. She stood behind him, clutching a broken chair leg, her knuckles white. The door groaned but did not yield. The light pulsed again, slower now, as if retreating, withdrawing its strength. And then it was gone. The darkness returned so quickly it felt violent, leaving them blinded, gasping in the sudden absence of glow. Only the storm remained, battering the villa with sheets of rain and howling wind. But the silence inside was worse. They did not sleep. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind, every flicker of lightning threatened to be more than it was. Hours stretched, broken only by the rhythm of their own shallow breaths. When dawn came, it brought no relief. The island lay under a sky the color of ash, the sea churning black and merciless. The jungle steamed in the morning heat, every leaf dripping with the night's rain. They ventured outside, compelled by a fragile hope that daylight might reveal the truth, that the nightmare might dissolve under the sun. But the sand bore new marks, prints too large, too many, pressed deep into the earth as though a procession had circled the villa while they cowered within. The trail led into the jungle. They did not follow. Instead they turned toward the beach, desperate for a sign of escape. The horizon stretched empty, no boats, no planes, no trace of the world beyond. Only waves devouring the sand with a rhythm that felt mocking, eternal. She fell to her knees, the salt water lapping against her skin, and for a moment she seemed carved from stone. He stood behind her, staring into the distance with eyes that no longer sought rescue but braced for inevitability. It was then that they saw him. At the edge of the pier, where the boat had once been tethered, a figure stood. Tall, familiar, immovable against the rising wind. The agent. His clothes were dry, untouched by the storm. His hands were clasped calmly behind his back. His face, though distant, bore no surprise at seeing them. He watched as one might watch pieces on a board, positioned exactly where they were meant to be. They called out, voices raw, desperate. His name tore from their throats like a plea, but he did not move. Instead, he turned, slowly, deliberately, and stepped into the jungle. They followed. The path twisted and narrowed, roots clawing at their feet, branches tearing at their arms. The air grew heavier, damp and oppressive, each breath thick with the scent of rot and earth. The jungle swallowed light, leaving only a dim haze where shadows pressed too close. They glimpsed him always just ahead, never near enough to touch, never far enough to lose. His figure was constant, unhurried, leading them deeper into the island's heart. And then the trees parted. They emerged into the same clearing they had seen before, but daylight revealed more than firelight ever had. The circle of stones at the center was etched with symbols carved too deep to be natural. Black stains spread across the ground, old and new, layers of sacrifice pressed into the soil. The robed figures were there, unmoving, their hoods turned toward the intruders. No fire burned, yet the air shimmered with heat, as though the clearing itself exhaled. At the center lay another figure, bound and motionless. Not a stranger this time. Her own face stared back at her from the altar, eyes closed, chest rising faintly with shallow breaths. She screamed. The sound cracked the air like thunder, raw and jagged, breaking whatever fragile courage had held her together. He staggered back, shaking his head in denial, whispering fragments of disbelief. Not real. Not real. But the figure on the altar moved. Her eyes opened. And they were hers. The cult began to chant. It rose like the tide, slow and inevitable, pressing into every corner of the clearing. The sound drilled into their skulls, vibrating bones, pulling thought into chaos. The air darkened though no clouds passed overhead, the very light bending beneath the weight of ritual. He tried to drag her back into the jungle, but the trees no longer obeyed. Paths shifted, closing, sealing, forcing them forward. The clearing expanded around them, leaving no escape. The agent stood among the robed figures now, his calm composure unbroken. He raised one hand, and the chanting swelled. The figure on the altar, her twin, her double, her reflection, opened her mouth and screamed a sound not human, a sound that split the air like glass shattering across the world. The ground trembled. The stones glowed. And the island awoke. The scream that tore from the woman on the altar did not fade into silence. It stretched, warped, and multiplied, reverberating through the clearing until it seemed to pour from every tree, every stone, every particle of air. Her voice became 1,000 voices, layered upon each other, harmonizing into a sound too vast for the human ear. The cult continued to chant, their rhythm merging with the scream, building a wall of sound that pressed against the intruders until thought itself bent and threatened to collapse. She staggered back, clutching at her head, but there was no escape from the noise. It was inside her, vibrating her bones, crawling behind her eyes. He pulled at her arm, shouting words that did not survive the storm of voices. The clearing pulsed with light, shadows bending, reality unraveling thread by thread. The figure on the altar, her reflection, her twin, her impossibility, began to shift. Flesh rippled like water disturbed by unseen hands. Her features stretched and contorted, then snapped back into place with grotesque precision. Her mouth opened wider than it should, teeth glinting in impossible rows, yet her eyes remained identical. Her eyes were hers. She could not look away. It was like gazing into a mirror that refused to obey, A mirror that breathed and screamed and promised truths too terrible to understand. When she whispered, her own voice slipped past her lips without her control. "It's me." The admission cracked something inside her. He dragged her back again, desperation cutting lines into his face, but every step away pulled them deeper into the clearing. The trees bent inward like prison bars, sealing every possible escape. The agent stood still among the robed figures, his calmness unbroken. His presence was not commanding but inevitable, like a piece of the ritual that had always been there, waiting to be revealed. His eyes met theirs for the first time, and in that gaze lay neither cruelty nor pity, only inevitability. The ground trembled. The stones beneath their feet pulsed with veins of golden light, the same unnatural glow they had seen beneath the villa door. It spread like roots, climbing the trees, threading the air, weaving them into the ritual. The cultists raised their hands in unison, their chanting transforming into something less human. The sounds elongated, distorted, words collapsing into guttural tones that scraped against the inside of the skull. The woman on the altar sat up. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as though strings pulled her body from above. Her mouth remained open, yet the scream had ceased. In its place was silence, an absence more profound than sound, a silence that demanded to be filled. The storm ceased. The ocean stilled. The entire island paused, holding its breath. She felt it first, the splitting. It began in her chest, a subtle pressure, as though her heart had been claimed by two bodies at once. She staggered, clutching at herself, gasping as the sensation spread. Her skin prickled, her vision blurred, and when she blinked, she saw herself twice, once through her own eyes, once from the altar where her double stared back. Her scream tore the air in two. He caught her as she fell, his hands shaking, his voice cracking as he shouted words that dissolved before reaching meaning. Her body writhed, torn between two existences. Each breath was hers and not hers, each heartbeat echoed between two bodies. On the altar, her double smiled. The clearing convulsed. The jungle bent as though in pain, leaves shriveling, trunks twisting, roots tearing from the ground. The air thickened until every breath was a drowning. The cultists continued to chant, their voices merging into one endless sound, their bodies swaying in rhythm with something deeper than ritual. He pulled at her, desperate to drag her free, but the ground beneath them shifted, rippling like water. Each step forward dissolved into nothing, replaced by the same stone circle, the same impossible prison. The agent raised his hand again. The double rose from the altar, moving with impossible grace, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Her eyes glowed faintly with golden fire, her smile stretching unnaturally wide. She whispered, her voice identical to the woman's own, carried by air that seemed to bypass ears and slide directly into thought. One must remain. The meaning sank like a blade. She staggered against him, clutching at his shirt, her eyes wild, begging for denial. But the island had no mercy. The cult's voices reinforced the words, chanting them again and again, until the phrase was no longer a statement but a law. One must remain. He shouted against it, his denial raw, his throat tearing with each sound. He clung to her, as if his arms could shield her from inevitability. But the clearing did not care. The island did not care. The double reached them. She extended a hand, pale and trembling, her smile still fixed, her eyes burning. When her fingers brushed against her counterpart's arm, the sensation split fully, tearing reality in half. She felt herself dissolve. She felt herself being chosen. The cult roared in triumph. The sound rose into the stormless sky, shattering silence, filling every void. The agent lowered his hand, expression unbroken, as though he had seen this countless times before. She screamed one last time. The clearing collapsed inward, and the island consumed her. When he opened his eyes, he was alone. The cult was gone. The clearing was empty. The stones lay silent, cold, stripped of light. Only the jungle remained, still and suffocating, its silence worse than the storm. He staggered, searching, calling her name until his throat bled, but no voice returned. Only echoes. The villa awaited him at the edge of the trees, pale against the darkness. Its door hung open, golden light pulsing faintly within. He understood then. The island had not finished. It never finished. The villa no longer looked like shelter. Its pale walls gleamed too brightly, as though lit from within by something not meant for human eyes. The golden glow spilling through the doorway pulsed faintly, steady as a heartbeat, beckoning him closer with a rhythm that felt older than language. He stood at the tree line, body broken with exhaustion, soul stripped raw. His voice had grown hoarse from calling her name, his throat raw with denial. Yet the island gave nothing back. No echo, no whisper, no trace of her remained, only silence, deeper than death, heavier than the sea. His body moved forward despite his mind's refusal. Each step across the clearing was clumsy, weak, but inevitable. The villa pulled him like a tide, each pulse of golden light a command. He reached the threshold and stopped, staring into the blackness within. It smelled wrong. Not of salt, not of wood, not of rain-soaked air. The scent was metallic, thick, clinging to the back of his throat like blood. He whispered, his voice breaking on the edges of silence. "Please." But there was no one left to hear him. Inside, the villa had changed. The rooms stretched longer, wider, yet pressed closer, collapsing and expanding as though the building breathed. Shadows bent across the walls, moving without source. The furniture sat where it had always been, yet its proportions were wrong, too tall, too narrow, too sharp, like memories drawn imperfectly. He staggered forward, calling her name again. This time, the villa answered. Her voice. It came from the hallway, soft, trembling, unmistakable. She called his name as she always had, intimate, pleading. He stumbled toward it, heart tearing itself apart in his chest. Every door he opened led to more darkness, more walls, more corridors that looped into themselves. Her voice followed, always near, always just beyond reach. He ran until his body collapsed, gasping on the warped floorboards. Sweat stung his eyes, tears blurred his vision. The air around him thickened, pressing down, vibrating faintly. When he lifted his head, he saw her. She stood at the end of the hall, pale, still, her eyes wide. She lifted a hand, fragile, trembling. "Help me," she whispered. His body surged forward before thought could catch him. He ran, arms outstretched. But the hallway lengthened with each step, stretching into infinity. Her figure receded, always the same distance away, always out of reach. When he collapsed again, sobbing, she smiled. And her teeth were not her own. The villa shifted around him. Floors sloped, walls bent, the ceiling sank lower, pressing into his back. Whispers rose from the cracks, not hers this time but many, overlapping, layered with venom and false comfort. They spoke his fears, his doubts, his memories. They told him the truth he had always avoided. He was never leaving the island. The villa had always been waiting for him. The retreat had never been meant for anyone else. He forced himself to his feet, staggering toward the door, desperate to escape into the storm. But when he opened it, the jungle did not wait outside. Instead, he stepped into a memory. The office where he had signed the contract, the agent smiling across the desk. Papers crisp, the promise of paradise laid out before him. The pen still lay in his hand, its weight undeniable, its ink fresh. The agent's voice filled the air, calm and assured. "You asked for peace. We delivered." He screamed and hurled the pen, but it passed through the figure, dissolving into black mist. The walls of the office bent inward, shrinking, collapsing, until he stumbled back through another door. This time he found himself on the beach. The sky burned red, the sea boiling, the sand blackened as if scorched by centuries of fire. She stood at the shoreline, her dress torn, her hair whipped by a wind that did not touch him. He ran to her, but when he reached her, his hands closed on empty air. Her body shattered into spray, dissolving into the waves. The sea whispered her name, mocking, endless. Time no longer obeyed. Hours and moments collapsed, folded, dissolved. He saw himself in fragments, signing the contract, boarding the boat, stepping into the villa, watching her vanish in the clearing. All at once. None of it linear. The island devoured chronology. Sleep and waking blurred. Hunger vanished, Thirst disappeared, replaced by a gnawing emptiness that was not of the body but of the soul. He wandered rooms that shifted shape each time he blinked, hallways that led back into themselves, windows that opened onto nothing but blackness. Every mirror he passed reflected not himself but her. Sometimes she wept, sometimes she screamed, sometimes she stood silent, staring, waiting. Each reflection ended the same way. With her whisper, "Stay." By the time the storm returned, he no longer knew if days had passed or years. His body weakened, his steps faltered, but the villa supported him, carrying him deeper into its labyrinth. It was not a house anymore. It was the island's heart, and he was its blood. When the chanting returned, it no longer came from outside. It came from within him. The rhythm beat in his chest, his breath, his bones. He moved with it, helpless, dragged by the ritual's gravity. At last he stumbled back into the main room. The golden light had returned, stronger than ever, flooding the floor, stretching up the walls, painting everything in molten hues. In its center stood the altar. The same stones. The same carvings. And upon it lay a body. Eyes closed, chest still, lips parted in silence. He staggered forward, sobbing, screaming, clawing at his face, but the figure on the altar did not move. The chanting swelled until the villa shook, its walls bending inward, its roof collapsing. The golden light consumed everything. He tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The island had chosen. The golden light devoured everything. It pressed against his eyes even when they were shut, searing through his skull, burning away thought, memory, and self. He tried to scream, but his throat produced no sound. His body lay heavy, unresponsive, as though the weight of centuries held him down. The chanting was no longer external. It was inside him, spiraling through his veins like fire, rising and falling with every pulse of his heart. When the light receded, the villa was gone. He stood in a void, endless and depthless. Blackness stretched in every direction, but it was not empty. It shifted, swirled, and breathed like a living sea. He felt watched, measured, dissected. The void examined him as though peeling away his skin layer by layer, stripping away every secret he had ever carried. A voice filled the darkness, not one voice, but countless, overlapping, each speaking fragments of thought. Some were his own memories, words he had once spoken, fears he had whispered in the privacy of his mind. Others belonged to her. Others to strangers. Together they formed a single chorus, unified and merciless. "You are ours." The black sea surged upward, engulfing him, seeping into his mouth, his eyes, his lungs. He choked and clawed at his face, but there was no escape. The void poured into him until he was hollow, until his body became nothing more than a vessel. And when he opened his eyes, he was no longer himself. The villa returned. But it was changed, or perhaps it was him who had changed. The walls pulsed faintly, their color deeper, richer, soaked in something that resembled blood more than paint. The air carried the heavy weight of incense, smoke curling from unseen braziers. He staggered through the halls, but his steps were no longer his own. The island guided him, pulling his limbs like a puppet strings. Mirrors lined the corridor. In each reflection, he did not see himself. He saw the man he had been, frail, trembling, broken. That version of him beat fists against the glass, screaming soundlessly for release. But the body he now inhabited was stronger, taller, drenched in shadow. His skin seemed to ripple faintly, as though something beneath it shifted. His eyes burned with the same golden light that had consumed the villa. He raised a hand to the mirror. The reflection did not mimic the gesture. Instead, it mouthed one final word. "Run." And then it shattered, the sound echoing like thunder. Days, weeks, years bled together. He no longer counted time. Hunger and thirst meant nothing now. The island fed him differently, through whispers, through visions, through the constant thrum of the chant within his chest. He wandered the villa endlessly, but it was no longer a prison. It was a temple. The photographs on the walls had changed. They no longer showed strangers. They showed him. Moments stolen from his life, boarding the boat, smiling at her on the beach, signing the contract. each photograph distorted, stretched, blurred, until his features dissolved into something unrecognizable. At the center hung the largest image, his own body stretched across the altar, lips parted, eyes glowing. He tried to tear it down, but the wall pulsed beneath his hands, the image sinking into his skin like hot wax. His palms burned with the imprint of his own face. The storm outside never ceased. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled endlessly, rain fell in sheets that turned the ground to mud and salt. But he no longer feared the storm. He no longer noticed it. The storm was inside him now, his thoughts fractured like broken glass, each shard reflecting pieces of something that was no longer human. Sometimes he thought he heard her voice in the distance. Sometimes he thought he saw her silhouette standing at the end of the hall, waiting. But when he called out, when he reached for her, it was only the villa answering. The island had learned his weakness. It would use her image forever, twisting her memory into a lure, a weapon, a knife. And still he followed. The altar waited. Every path led back to it. No matter which door he opened, which staircase he climbed, which hallway he entered, he returned to that room. The golden light burned brighter now, so intense it blurred the edges of vision, seared away every shadow. He approached unwillingly yet obediently, his steps perfectly synchronized with the pulse of the chant. The air thickened, vibrating, humming with an energy too vast, too ancient to belong to anything mortal. And then he saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, arranged in a circle around the altar. They were tall and gaunt, their faces hidden beneath masks carved from bone and wood. Their eyes glowed faintly from within, each pair locked on him. The cult had not vanished. It had never been human. The figures raised their hands in unison, and the chant swelled, rattling the villa's very foundation. He fell to his knees, body racked with tremors, tears streaming down his face. He tried to fight, but the island had already taken him. His will dissolved, his identity stripped. The altar called to him. The figures pressed closer. And with a voice that was no longer his own, he whispered the only word left in him. Yes. The altar had been waiting for him since the moment he set foot on the island. Every path, every shadow, every whisper had led to this. Now, as the masked figures closed their circle, he felt the inevitability press against his chest like a stone. The golden light swelled, pouring through cracks in the walls, bleeding from the floor, dripping from the ceiling. It pulsed in rhythm with his heart, until he could no longer distinguish whether the beat belonged to him or to the island itself. The chant rose with it, each syllable cutting through him like shards of glass. He stumbled forward. His legs did not belong to him anymore. They moved with precision, like instruments guided by an unseen hand. The air grew heavier with each step, thick as oil, forcing itself into his lungs. His skin burned, then froze, then burned again, as though he were being reshaped from the inside out. The altar loomed above him, carved from black stone, veins of crimson pulsing across its surface like living tissue. It reeked of iron and ash, of centuries soaked in blood. Upon it lay carvings that twisted and writhed as though alive, depicting forms too alien to understand, shapes that defied geometry. When he reached it, he collapsed to his knees. The figures surged closer, their masks reflecting the golden light. He felt their gaze pierce through flesh and bone, straight into the hollow shell where his soul once resided. One figure stepped forward. Its mask was carved from a human skull, its surface etched with runes that bled faintly with light. In its hand, it held the same blade he had seen in the jungle clearing. The same blade that had ended the bound figure's life. The edge shimmered with something that was not metal, something older, hungrier. The chant broke into silence. And in that silence, the island spoke through him. I give myself. The words were not his. His lips moved, his throat vibrated, but the voice belonged to the island. The blade descended. It did not cut flesh. It carved deeper, into what lay beneath. He felt himself unravel, strings of thought and memory yanked free, coiling into the golden light above. His body convulsed, racked with pain beyond comprehension, yet he could not scream. His mouth hung open, but only the chant poured out, an endless stream of syllables that were not human. The light devoured him. When it was done, The altar was empty. But he had not vanished. He stood among them now, cloaked and masked, his form indistinguishable from theirs. The chant flowed through him effortlessly, no longer foreign but natural, as though it had always been part of his blood. His thoughts were not his own. His memories of her, the boat, the villa, the fear, dissolved like smoke. All that remained was obedience. The storm outside raged on, but he no longer feared it. The storm was theirs. The island was theirs. And he was theirs. Days passed, though he no longer measured time. New voices sometimes screamed from the jungle, carried across the wind, only to be silenced by the ritual that followed. The cycle repeated as it always had, as it always would. He watched without feeling as new travelers were brought to the island, lured by promises of paradise. He watched them laugh on the sand, swim in the turquoise water, marvel at the villa. He watched their joy with cold detachment, knowing where it would lead. The island never rested. It consumed, always. And he was part of it now. Sometimes, when the storm fell quiet, when the ocean softened to glass, he thought he heard something beneath the chant. A whisper, faint and desperate, clawing at the edges of his mind. A name. Her name. For a moment, something inside him would ache. A flicker, like a dying flame. But the mask never moved. The chant never faltered. And the island swallowed the whisper before it could take form. The island stood eternal. The villa gleamed white in the sun. The ocean lapped against the shore with deceptive gentleness. And in the heart of the jungle, the circle of masked figures gathered again, their voices rising in perfect unison. Another boat was already on its way.